From 1953 to 2023, everything from the equipment used to how a broadcast is transmitted has evolved. WJBF was started by J.B. Fuqua when TV was in its infancy and radio was still the main source of news.
In the early days of television, it was all live. There was no video recording, so that was the main thing to understand about 1953.
Who would ever have thought that television would have become as important as it is, J.B.?
When J.B. Fuqua started WJBF in 1953, radio news was king. The first broadcast news programs were newsreels, short documentary-like films shown before a movie in a theater.
Newsreels, had been in business, 50, 60 years before television came along, and they had kind of developed the science of how to go out and get a story fast and put it out twice a week, which was an amazing thing.
TVs were becoming more common in American households for entertainment. In 1944, CBS launched a 15-minute news program, and NBC followed 1 year later. Benjamin Singleton is the production manager at Moving Image Research Collections at the University of South Carolina. He says the format was much like the cinema newsreel.
You had to talk to the camera every minute you were on air, or you had to show a film, and that's pretty much what you could do.
The first cameras used in news were reel-to-reel cameras that used film. These were the same cameras used by photographers when WJBF got started.
And the news station cinematographers, they had to go out and use motion picture film, just like they did in Hollywood. It had to be developed, and it took several hours. So it took planning to get out there, get a news story, get it developed, find the shot that you need, and get it on a projector to go out to the viewers.
Mike Ludwikowski began his career in news in 1973 at WJBF as a film processor. He says that though the cameras were newer and more advanced than they had been in the 50s, they were still using reel-to-reel film at the time.
You had to go out with, again, film, shoot the story, come back, process the film, and the film that you had to use, you physically tore it, taped it back together to make an edit. So once you used a shot, that was it. You've used it.
Lud, as he is affectionately known at WJBF, says that in those days, putting together a full-length story took time, sometimes days. They not only had to edit the film and write the story, but they had to add sound as well.
It wasn't like today where everything was all together. Now when you record, your sound is on the video. But back then, we had special cameras that could do that, but you normally went out with a silent film camera and then had to come back and work on your piece. And it took a while to get everything together.
He says there wasn't much of a margin of error when using film.
Because when you were sent out with, say, 100 feet of film to do a story, that was 3.5, 4 minutes worth of film. You better select your right shots.
Lud knew the founder of WJBF and says he made sure the station stayed up to date on technology.
J.B. Fuqua, the man whose initials are still on the station, was a pioneer in technology. He loved reading and acquiring the newest technology. And in 1975, he was in Japan. He came back with a reel-to-reel recorder that used the audio tape that they were using for that day, but was able to do video.
This was the lead into the change from film to videotape in the late 70s and early 80s, the first major equipment change in TV news.
Videotape was a huge technological leap for television, because then it didn't have to be live all the time.
Videotape recorders required a lot of equipment in the field.
Basically, when you got set up, you were locked in there. Big heavy tripod, because it was a big heavy camera, a camera with a cord to a recorder, batteries for both devices, batteries for your lights. You needed much more light because we weren't using chips, that we were using tubes that required a lot more light in order to make an image.
The editing process changed too.
Tape-to-tape editing, you start with a blank tape. You find the shot you want to put on that blank tape, and you put that shot on. Then you find your next shot and put that after the first shot. So you basically built a sequence of shots.
In film editing, they couldn't use a shot more than once, and in current digital editing, they can use a shot as many times as they choose. But in tape-to-tape editing, while shots could be reused, an editor had to be careful because the quality of the video could be compromised.
You had generations. When you first record something that's in analog, that's your first generation recording. Once you made the edit from one tape machine to another, your finished story was now second generation. If you took that second generation and made another copy of it, there was a definite visible degradation in the signal.
Videotapes were used in news until as late as the early 2000s, when everything changed from analog to digital.
The progression from analog to digital and getting away from recording on a moving format and putting it on a memory card has been one of the biggest changes that I've seen. It's sped up everything.
The digital format means quicker filming and editing, allowing for news stations to get more news out. Ludd says the change was a big adjustment and was tough for him to get used to.
With the speed comes, for an old timer, a lack of the polished quality that we were used to. We used to light things better. We used to take our times. It's gotten more immediate. And frankly, that doesn't bother the viewer. The viewer wants to see what's happening, and that's our job.
Recording equipment aren't the only changes in tech that WJBF has seen over the last 7 decades. The way we get the news to a viewer's TV has too, to a point. Since the dawn of television, radio frequencies have been used to transmit picture and sound to radios and television. And our chief engineer, Matt Johnson, says that's still true today.
Here at Television Park, we are broadcasted actually from Beach Island, South Carolina. That's where our transmitter site is. We have a technology RF, which stands for radio frequency, that happens between the TV station here to Beach Island. It is a line of sight, point-to-point connection that occurs. That's how the signal from the TV station here in the studio gets out to everyone in the community.
When former chief engineer Kerry Hale started his career at WJBF in 1973, TV signal transmission looked a lot different than it does today.
When I first got here, it was mostly all over-the-air broadcast. Cable was just in its beginning, so everybody had to have an antenna.
In the late 60s, news stations began using microwave trucks. They transmitted video from the truck directly to the station, allowing reporters to go live on location. In the 80s, a different field transmission method came about.
Our satellite van is on a Ford E350 van, much like families used to travel with. The satellite signal goes between the satellite van into space, and then from space back down to here at the television park to our satellite garden. And that video signal comes into the studio here, and then back to the transmitter site, and then out to the public again.
That made stuff a little more instantaneous, let's say. We didn't have to go through 3 steps to get a signal back to the station, just one.
And as with filming equipment, the transition from analog to digital was the most significant change for transmitting signals. WJBF went fully digital in 2009. Engineers went from needing more knowledge in electrical to more of an IT base. Hale says it was an adjustment and a lot of work to stay up to date on how the new equipment worked.
Every time we got a new piece of equipment, particularly transmitters and things like that, I would go to generally speaking, a lot of the corporations that built this equipment would have training for the engineers.
Johnson says that the switch from analog to digital transmitters saved a lot of electricity. The station's electric bill dropped to nearly $16,000 a month. He says as long as technology advances, the better WJBF will be able to bring the community quality news.
Technology has really made broadcast television more accessible for people. We're able to go to places that we probably could have never went before.
Hey CSRA, that's just part of your and our hometown history. At Television Park, Kim Vickers, WJBF News Channel 6.